Oh, good morning. It is time for True Hoops little Zoom from quarantine show. Quarantine's kind of over, but we're still kind of at home, right? Um, that's David Thorpe. This is Zack Weiner, who is the president and founder of Overtime. How are you, Zack?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, guys.
No, thanks for being here. It's a big day on, you can tell it's a big day. I'm wearing a button-down shirt.
I didn't get that memo.
Same. I don't think I've ever gotten that memo in my life.
It's just a little, just to show we care. All right. So, Zack, you're here to discuss a pretty bold thing you have going on here. Overtime is attempting to kind of fill this strange void in American basketball development. So it goes like this. Elite players are coming into the NBA. In those years before, we've learned from a million books and documentaries and magazine stories that there's all these shady operators and there's AAU and NCAA scandals. And so right now, then the G League started its Ignite team. We kind of get a sense that the future will be different than the past. Over time, your company, a digital media company, is about to launch a totally new and different approach to solving this issue. What are you doing right now, Zack? What's going on?
Yeah, it's crazy to say that we're doing it. I mean, we had this idea 2 years ago, really, back when Commissioner David Stern was still alive. He thought the idea was crazy at first to basically launch a super league for the next generation of basketball players, both domestically and internationally. And provide them with not just elite basketball training, which I'm sure we'll get into, but amazing, very customized education. And really kind of the most, I think, explosive thing right now is to compensate them directly for playing basketball starting at the age of 16. And, as I said, 2 years ago, it was sort of a pipe dream, and now it's a reality. We're launching in October in Atlanta, and we're very, very excited.
October seems really close.
It is close, but we've been working on it for a couple of years. And so, we didn't announce this until the New York Times did a feature, I think in April it was. And don't get me wrong, it's been a lot of work since that point, but there was a lot of work leading up to it.
How is it going? How are you feeling today?
I feel great. I'm sort of a worrier by nature. And I think for a project of this magnitude, you need some warriors. You need to be thinking about all the little and big things that could go wrong. But overall, trending very, very positively. The caliber of athletes that have joined our program is unbelievable. The caliber of the team, from the coaching staff to the academics, is amazing. Our venue is almost ready, which is going to be unbelievable. We have some amazing partners that we haven't announced just yet, but things are really trending in an amazing direction. And I've been really happy just to see the response, people in the basketball world that understand some of the challenges that these athletes face, and how we hope that we can help solve for some of these athletes.
So Zack, a lot of people are familiar with the IMG model. And for 3 years, I ran my pro business from there. I had really nothing to do with the high school program, except for I sometimes worked with them. Like Dwight Powell was a guy that would train with us a lot and very talented at that point, 17, 18-year-old. How is your model different from what you think probably IMG is doing?
Yeah, I mean, I would kind of break down that question sort of, I think there's two ways. There's how is it different for the athletes, and then how is it different from a business perspective?
Yeah.
I'll start with the business perspective. IMG's model, as best as I understand, is, they call it sort of a heads and beds model. They're charging many, young athletes to come, and they're willing to pay whatever the tuition is. And then they bring in the top athletes. And I think a lot of time they're on scholarship. So, it's sort of a camp or school model. For us, it's sort of the inverse in that the athletes are getting paid. But for us, this is an IP development and media rights play. Ultimately, it's the ability to attract really high level sponsors to do licensing deals, and we believe that we're building really the first league made for the next generation of fans, really from the ground up. And Overtime comes with 50 million followers and growing across all these different platforms. So we have the built-in distribution, we have the built-in engagement from our fans. And this is exactly, we feel like, what they've been waiting for in terms of a basketball product. So that's on the business side. On the athlete side, IMG Academy is a very nice program. But for us, of course, we differentiate with actually compensating the athletes. Second, on a basketball development level, we believe that we're providing for 16, 17, 18-year-olds really something unprecedented. Our head coach is Kevin Ollie, who obviously won a national championship. We have, statisticians and nutritionists literally that come from the NBA. I mean, we have 24 athletes, and our basketball staff is actually larger than that. So there's a better than 1-to-1 ratio amongst just basketball staff. And then I think the education is really an important element to really customize a 4-to-1, player to teacher ratio, and things like financial literacy and mental health, activism, how to use your platform and things like that. So really on the athlete side, it's almost like an accelerator to reach the NBA.
So there's a lot, I mean, my head's full of questions, but can you just take us back to the beginning a little bit? What's your story, and what's the Overtime story, and how do you land in this place?
Yeah, for sure. So like you guys, been a basketball junkie since the early days of my life. Wanted to be in the NBA, and at a certain point realized that wasn't going to come to fruition.
It never works out. It just doesn't work out.
It doesn't work out. Did you guys know the odds are like that?
Yeah.
So I actually had my first sports startup when I was in college at Penn. It was a website called the Sports Quotient. And essentially the idea was that I was this, displaced sports fan. I was a Yankees, Knicks, et cetera fan growing up in New York, and I wanted to give my opinions about sports. And so I started a website where I was able to do that. But I quickly realized there were hundreds of college kids across the country that were similar to me. So I launched this website, a couple of years in, I had 250 writers, and it was great. But what I kind of like to say is that I kind of figured out the supply side. Like I could have had like thousands of writers that were like willing and wanting to write, but there wasn't a lot of demand for just more, written articles that weren't maybe at the depth of something like what you guys do. It was just kind of more content on the internet that no one was really asking for. It was good stuff, but not, incredible. And so when I decided that I wanted to start my second company, with my co-founder, Dan Porter, I was like, I want to start in the opposite side. I want to start with the demand. And the demand was clear that for Gen Z and millennial sports fans under 35, the ecosystem was changing. If you look at the live ratings, they continue to go down, but particularly down for young people. And we wanted to create this brand, this community that this generation would feel like is theirs, and that they could watch content and interact with. And so that's what we've done at Overtime for the past 5 years. We now do over 1.5 billion video views. We do short form content. We do longer form 15 to 20 minute episodic content. We do basketball, football, esports, soccer. And we've really gotten into the cultural zeitgeist, I think, of young people, to the point where I can walk down the street in an Overtime shirt or Overtime Elite shirt. Someone's like, yo, shout out to Overtime, and throw up our O hand signal. And it's been amazing. But I think that, as a media company, we want to be vertically integrated, and I think that we want to own the most powerful IP that's going through our platform. We kind of brainstormed on that years ago. And then really the way that we came to Overtime Elite was really with an athlete first model. Is we actually interviewed these top athletes and their parents, and we said, what's going on? Does AAU work for you? Do you like the current system? And I think people in the space know that the system is not perfect. And I think we really came away with those three conclusions. These athletes feel that they deserve to be paid, and there's no reason they can't be. The basketball development, including being overworked and having folks around you that really understand what it takes to make the NBA, it's not there for all these athletes. And then education, we saw that 90% of elite high school athletes are changing high schools, and they're changing high schools for the basketball reason, not for the education reason. And so that suffers. And so we felt like there was a real solution that we could solve for the athletes, while at the same time creating an incredible business opportunity.
What are the stresses parents are feeling? Like, I know that actually it's like a friend of mine, they have a very elite prospect as a son, and they're calling journalists to be like, what do we do? Like, how do we meet an agent? Which trainer do we go to? It just seems like nobody has a playbook.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of things. I think I'll start with where you started, with just like a lack of information and resources, right? I mean, how to choose an agent. Can I even choose an agent right now?
Right.
Things like that, I think, are massive issues. And that's why we think it's so important to have coursework within Overtime Elite about choosing an agent, about financial literacy, about all these questions. So I think that's one of the big ones. I think, I remember one of the quotes, I'll leave them unnamed, but from a parent of an elite prospect, they said, with the amount of money that we spent on AAU, we could have bought a house with all the travel and training, all that stuff. So you have this model where we're actually paying the athletes for all this stuff, but the traditional model is that they have to pay for all this stuff. And it can be very, very hard on the family financially and emotionally and all those things. So I think those are two of the big things. And I would say, another really big one is these parents are aware that their athletes are being overworked. I mean, you guys probably know this even better than me, but Zion comes into the league and he's injured, a few times his rookie year. And there's a lot of reasons for injuries, but those orthopedic type of injuries, it's because there's a lot of work being built up in these athletes, and it's not just ideal. And I think that oftentimes the people surrounding athletes, and I don't want to say everyone, because there are some amazing people in the AU space, the grassroots space, et cetera, but there are people that are more focused on the short term, or a high school coach says, I want to win the championship. And that's natural, right? That's the state that you're in. But for the 16 or 17-year-old athlete, they should really be thinking, as Brandon Williams, our head of basketball operations, likes to say, if you're really that elite, you actually shouldn't even be thinking about just the first NBA contract. It's getting to that second NBA contract, because that's the real moneymaker. And what can you start doing at 16 or 17 that's going to set you up for that long-term success?
I'm taking it easy right now just to be ready for my second contract. I don't want to.
Are the salaries are the salaries for the players public? Do we know about? Is that online?
Yes and no. We've gone on record saying that every single athlete will receive 6 figures per year, and every athlete has received that. They also receive equity and overtime. We want to make sure that they are part of the upside. They receive, in insurance. They also receive a college scholarship in case they decide not to go play professional basketball. There's opportunities to monetize name, image, likeness. There's group licensing rights. In terms of specific dollar amounts, there have been a lot of reports around there, but we as a company, we don't confirm or deny specific amounts. That's for the athlete we advise not sharing, but sometimes they want to share.
And how do you go about selecting the athletes?
Yeah. So, we have a pretty big group. As I mentioned, Brandon Williams was an assistant GM, for the Kings most recently. And Kevin Ollie obviously coached in college and played in the NBA. But we actually, beyond that, have a whole coaching and scouting staff. And we look, both domestically and internationally, and I would say, I don't know what the exact formula would be, but it's mostly based off of basketball, 80, 90%. But we also want to make sure that these young men are good fits for the program, that they're ready for this leap. And we use this word recruiting, but a lot of it is just informing the athlete and their parents, because we do not want an athlete to choose this program if they don't feel genuinely like it's the right opportunity for them.
It's hard to sell something that doesn't exist yet, though, right?
Yeah,
it'll be much easier when you have an open campus and video to show people.
100%. Actually, one of our investors was emailing me this morning and was just saying, checking in, how's it going? And I listed a lot of the things that are going really, really well, and I listed some of the challenges. And I said, it's kind of unbelievable that we have 7 5-star recruits domestically, and I think we have 4 of the top 6 international prospects. They've all joined. They're going to be coming to campus late September, and it's amazing that exists. To your point, Henry, without the facility, it's going to be ready very soon, but they haven't been able to walk through it without any track record, right? Obviously the individuals that we have at the table in terms of Kevin Ollie, our principal was a principal of the year in Washington, D.C. So really excellent people. But I think it just shows you how much of a need there is for this. And I think next year, once we have a year under our belt, I wouldn't say recruiting has been hard. I wouldn't say it's been easy. It's been about kind of what we expected, but I think it will only continue to get easier.
So you say league. Are they only playing against each other? It doesn't make sense for that. Or are you going to schedule the Montvers and IMG academies and those kinds of places?
Yeah. It's a really good and important question. So we're having, we'll have 24 athletes. We'll divide them into 3 teams. And then they will play internal competition, because there's a reason why we wanted the best of the best, for them to be able to go against each other and train with each other. But absolutely, there will be outside competition as well. And so, as you alluded to, that'll be some of the top high school and prep teams. And then we also think it's important that they get some experience against pros, whether that's international or here in the United States. So it'll be a combination, which I think will be fun for our audience and fun for our athletes as well.
I noticed, I think most or half-ish of the recruits that you have signed are class of 24. So you're going to have them for a while.
Yeah. So the idea is that they enter basically when they're juniors or seniors in high school. And that, some of them will, have signed contracts or will decide to stay sort of for that post post-grad year, so to speak. But as you guys also know, the NBA is widely expected to change their rules around one and done. And so we actually, I think the timing of what we're doing is really, we think it's really good. I think if you tried to do this 5-10 years ago, I don't think the world was ready for this. And I think if we waited 5 to 10 years, it might have been too late, right? Like we wanted to do it just before, a couple of years before the one and done stuff potentially. I mean, we're not dependent on that. And like I said, these athletes will stay with us for a post-grad year, but if they do get rid of one and done, it's just even more incentive to come with us. We're seeing a lot of interesting changes in the NCAA landscape that I think are really positive. So I think it's also right time, right place as it refers to those things.
So you guys are
sorry, go ahead.
I would say you're going after a 5-star recruit. 5-star, for anyone listening that isn't following high school recruiting so closely, it's the highest number of stars you can get. There's no 6 stars. Moses Malone was a 5-star player. He might have been the first. That's when Howard Garfield started using. In fact, that's why he called his camp 5-star. That's how we rated players, 5 stars, and Moses was a 5-star guy. So they graduate high school. They could go to college. They could go to Europe. They can go play the G League Ignite. They can go to Overtime Elite. So that's your competition, right? And how do you? I know you don't want to say recruiting; it's more informing. But where is the best advantage in your mind? There's a chance for you to, give us your PR. Why is that Overtime Elite the best option compared to those other options that they have?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think a really important distinction is that, as Henry said, a lot of our athletes are joining when they're 16, right? So the difference between going to 2 years of high school, which, there are many good high schools, but there's a lot of restrictions on how much you can practice, the limitation on resources. So the difference between going to 2 years of high school and then probably 1 year of college or Europe or Ignite versus 3 years really being focused on getting you to the NBA. And again, that's not just the on-court stuff, it's the mental, et cetera. I think that's a gigantic advantage just from a quantity of time perspective. I would also say, I just alluded to this a second ago, but the restrictions that oftentimes surround high school basketball and college basketball, they're there for a reason. And I wouldn't even necessarily argue that they shouldn't be there, but they probably should not be there for the elite of the elite 16, 17, 18-year-old athletes. So it's about the resources, the people that we can put around them. I think it's about being around such a high concentration of like-minded folks and young men that are looking to achieve those same goals. And to be honest, I don't think that anyone can offer the same level. I mean, as I said, we have better than a 1-to-1 ratio on the basketball staff. We had a 4-to-1 ratio on the academic staff. And we're paying these athletes, more than really anyone else is paying them. So for me, it's really the full package.
There's if I were a 16-year-old athlete, I think one thing that I would be excited about here is I can drive a Nissan or whatever and not have like newspapers reporting on where'd you get this Nissan, right? Like there's so much. I remember that OJ Mayo scandal went down. There was just like this, it's like, well, USC's definitely stealing all of his work for profit, right? But he may or may not have gotten, I forget what it was, but something like underwhelming. That was the allegation. Just just get to be a teenager who has a job at the mall or whatever is it's pretty cool if you're an elite athlete.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that that's a big part of it. We know that there's, a lot of stuff that happens under the table. And I think to kind of rise above that and be like, yeah, I'm paid. I'm going to post on Instagram that I just bought this car. Like everyone knows I made hundreds of thousands of dollars. And obviously the flip side to that, is making sure as best as we can that we educate the athletes on the power of investing and saving money and all of that. But I think that's a big part of it. And I do think that there is a big part of this that it feels right. It feels equitable for the athletes to participate in the upside. And, they don't really get to do that necessarily in other places. Obviously, they get to do it in the NBA, and the NBA has done an amazing job. But, if I think about Overtime Elite's board members like Carmelo Anthony and Jay Williams, they live through this type of process. And I think one of the big things is they think about how this is kind of what the future should look like. And, Carmelo in particular is very into activism and equality. And, I'm not saying that we're changing the world here with Overtime Elite in terms of social injustice or anything like that. But I do think that this is more fair and just for the athletes.
Yeah, and I misspoke. You're not competing against those groups. You're getting them before they have to make those decisions.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Although you said you might do a post-grad, which has become a very, very big thing. Certainly where I live in Florida, they could stay one more year and then still go to college. They can't play college sports. Am I correct? college basketball.
That's correct. As of now, the NCAA would not allow them to play college basketball. We don't have anything against that, right? Like that's not a restriction we're imposing on them. It's the way that the rules are constructed right now. But we're also seeing a lot of things evolve there. So we'll see how that plays out. But yes, as of now, if an athlete signs up, they can go to college, they can go on our scholarship, but they can't play NCAA basketball.
But they still G League and Europe and of course the NBA. And ideally, I'm guessing everyone that comes to you, I mean, I know you know this, they all think they're going to make the NBA, or at least they think there's a great chance they'll make it. Otherwise, they probably wouldn't be going in the first place. Are they living? Is there a campus dorm? Do families ever come? Do you think they'll come and stay? Like IMG is a real estate play. A lot of families bought real estate. It's one of the huge parts of it.
Yep.
So we had talked to me about that approach from you guys.
Yeah. So I just want to quickly address what you were saying about players making the NBA. So obviously, we believe that our scouting team is really good. And, I think even publicly, the rankings are really high for these athletes. But you're right that not every single athlete that's ever projected to make the NBA makes the NBA.
Of course not.
And so I do think there's all the basketball routes that you talked about in terms of playing internationally, G League, et cetera. But I also think that's why the education is really important, why we're focused on internships for these athletes, because, there also could be tragic injuries. Someone could break their leg and never be able to play basketball again. And obviously that can happen whatever route you take. So we want to make sure that they're prepared. But basically, I want to make sure that any athlete, whether they end up in the NBA or not, is like, yeah, Overtime Elite was clearly the right decision for me. It maximized my potential to go to the NBA. But even if I didn't make it, I gained X, Y, and Z things that set me up for another course. But in terms of families, they are a gigantic part of this. We want to make sure that the families are being kind of educated in a similar way in terms of their access to resources and thinking about agents and financial literacy. I mean, these are 16 and 17-year-old young men. Sometimes they have strong support networks around them, sometimes weaker, but making sure that we really take care of those families as well, I think is important. In terms of those families being in Atlanta and the campus vibe. So the athletes will live in what I would call kind of elevated dorms. So probably nicer than what we went to in terms of dorms, but also not like 5-bedroom apartments or houses each. So that will be kind of their living situation. There'll be RAs, obviously safety is of utmost importance. And then a lot of families will decide to move to Atlanta so they can have closer proximity, come to the games and stuff like that. But some families not as well, to your point around IMG or Montverde or any of these, boarding schools, as you might call them. Sometimes the families want to be close and sometimes they don't. And, luckily in our situation, each of the families now have money so that if they want to do that, they can, but they might have a job or whatever. It might not be the right move.
We got a question from Randy in the chat, which says, this sounds incredible, Zach. What did the Dukes of the world say to recruits about you? Probably terrible stuff.
I don't know. I'd love to be a fly on the wall for those conversations. But
what are you going to do with $100,000? That's crazy. Nobody likes money. No, I'm just kidding.
I would say, look, I've been impressed that most, I don't want to say most, but a lot of people in this space, I've spoken to a bunch of college coaches. First of all, a lot of them were former NBA players, and then, we're high school players before that. And a lot of them do have the athlete's best interest at heart. And it doesn't mean that they're going to stop trying to recruit athletes. But I think that, and we've heard Adam Silver say this about Overtime Elite. We've heard, different people in the NCAA publicly say that optionality ultimately is generally a good thing, right? It's a good thing in our society. The fact that I can use Uber or Lyft, it probably lowers prices. I can get a car faster. Just, it's a very simplified example. But, in the space of sports, it's generally not as many options, right? Which is ultimately probably a disservice to these young men. And it's not going to be like other industries like clothing where you can choose 100 different things. There's only going to be so many paths. But I think generally people are supportive of there being more paths, and each path does have its own merits. There may be some athletes where the right path is to go to college basketball for 1 year, for 4 years, whatever it is. Obviously, we believe that our program is really great for a lot of those really elite young men. But I personally am not in the business of, and as a company, we're not in the business of, saying that's a bad route, right? It's not a bad route. It's a different route. And we think for a lot of athletes, our route is maybe more well suited for them. So I don't know what they're saying, but, I hope it's something similar.
Zach, So two quick things. One is, I'm sorry, Henry, if I cut you off of a question.
We got time. Don't worry.
Okay, I thought we did. So yeah, you're on a sip of water. Go ahead, because I'm gonna speak just for a moment. So first of all, whose idea was it to add that ingredient of education? Because as someone who has a minority stake in a team, in a soccer team overseas, I've spent some time in the UK and where our team is in Wales, and that's a big issue in professional soccer over there. You bring cadets in starting. We have 12-year-olds that stay on campus or drive in, and those players that end up falling short of really making a living playing soccer, which is the enormous majority of players, they don't have the educational component mixed in. And I mean for all of Europe, I'm only speaking about Europe, and that's a big problem. So I'm curious about that, and I want to add something else, and I give kudos to you, but I want our listeners to understand, as someone who's gone through the high school experience, both as a coach myself, but I just went through with my son for 4 years, who's now in college playing basketball, but he had one of the worst coaches imaginable. Now, he was recruited by a lot of people. We would have had to cheat to get into these schools. Something, they would tell me rent a place for a month, and when the county looks, then you use that one rental in our zone because it was a public school. As if I really want to see headlines about my son being cheated, whatever. I was at ESPN when it first started. There's so much garbage in high school sports. There are so many men who should not be coaching teenagers. And I know because I had one coaching mine. And I brought in 5 and 6 amazing assistants just to make up for how terrible this guy is. But eventually, he was the head coach. The principal didn't care, which is also a big problem in high school today. The principals just they're bureaucrats. They want to get through. You're lucky if you have a good one. And we had to pull him out his senior year. He's like, I can't play with this guy anymore. He played 31 minutes a game. It wasn't about the playing time. It was the experience was just awful. So when you say you have NBA players that have told you how, I'm sure they had similar stories. They were great. They probably were treated like gold by their head coach because they were so much better than everyone, but it didn't mean it was a good experience. And to your point about a lack of time on the court, that's a very real thing. You've got volleyball, JV and varsity, and girls basketball, sometimes freshman JV varsity, and your freshman JV basketball teams. And there's only so many hours in the day. So a lot of these players, all they want to do is work. So to that in mind, I'm guessing they have like fingerprint access to get to the gym once it's open. They can just like colleges where they can shoot and play all the time.
Yeah, so I guess I'll rewind to the education point and then circle back to that second question, but both really important. On the education front, it's definitely been part of the DNA from the beginning. First of all, actually, my co-founder, Dan Porter, was actually the founder of the Teach for America program. As you might guess, that's been around for a long time. He's a lot older than me. So he's been, and he was a public school teacher, I think, for 10 years. So he's been passionate about education long before he was an entrepreneur. And that also means that his network is fortunately very deep. And so we're able to recruit in really, really good people. So for him, it's always been a passion. And for me, once I decided I was not going to be an NBA player, education was at the root of what I did. I went to Stuyvesant High School here in New York. I took 10 AP classes. I was like a crazy academic nut, went to Penn. And so I think that it's kind of in the blood of us as founders. And then, for the folks that we brought on, I mean, Brandon Williams is a good example. When he was working at the league offices, he was also getting his law degree from Rutgers. So I think education is sort of in the blood of leadership. And I think once that's sort of in your blood, it's hard. It doesn't sound right to bring in an athlete and then not give them great education. And we're able to find amazing educators because they're passionate about educating these young men. Because the way that I think about this is we're not just educating 24 young men. These are 24, let's just say 20 of them make the NBA. Or even maybe 4 that don't, they are all going to be role models, really, whether they want to or not, right? And some of them will probably have tens of millions of followers when they grow up. And for me, if we're educating them and helping them with their mental health and activism and all these things, we're then impacting tens of millions of people. I mean, I don't mean to make it so grandiose, but if you could pre-identify the next president of the United States, you'd want to make sure they get amazing education and all these things. You can't do that. In basketball, we kind of can pre-identify who's going to be the next LeBron. If you take a cohort of 24, you're going to get another KD LeBron type.
You actually have another LeBron.
Yeah, we do. Yeah. LeBron Lopez of the Philippines, which is unbelievable. But yeah, so I think the education part is huge, both from an input and output perspective. Your
Can
second
we just
question.
pause for 1 second? I know where we got like bifurcated conversation here, but 10 APs, Zach? Did I hear that right? Did you say you got 10 APs?
Yeah, I was so nuts, Henry, that my junior year of high school, I didn't have a lunch. Like Stuyvesant was so crazy, this magnet school in New York, that they knew that kids really like wanted to go all out. So they created this thing called band lunch, where New York City schools do not allow you to not have a lunch period, but Sty found a workaround so that you could take band class at the same time as you were eating lunch. And actually, the ironic part is the band teachers don't allow you to actually eat lunch in that period. They know that that's the rule. They don't allow you. So then you got to eat some other class. Yes, I was also like a chess nerd growing up. I was very into academics and stuff.
I think I know why you didn't make the MBA, because you're not eating lunch, you're band lunch, you're doing chess.
There's not a high correlation between those things and making the MBA.
Okay, you were saying though, to David's point about the difficult high school experiences, did you finish that point? Did you have more you want to say?
Give us like a schedule of what their day would look like to include
the
educational part of it.
Yeah. Right. So I guess I'll answer the very specific question of what you said about access to gym and stuff like that. Like that is huge, right? And our coaching staff talks about that all the time. Like if a guy had like a bad day of practice or a bad game, like he wants to get back in the gym, he wants to put up shots. Yep. So we have 3 full-size NBA courts, obviously with the 2 normal hoops, but we'll have additional hoops as well. So they'll have great access to that stuff. And then obviously great access to weight room, locker room, et cetera. In terms of schedule, it's not as much classroom time as sort of a normal high school experience. And it's partially because we want to make sure they get enough basketball training and recovery and all that stuff. But it's partially because when you have a 4-to-1 ratio and you have some of literally the best educators in the world, you can get a lot more done in a smaller amount of time if the players are actually engaged and the curriculum is really centered around them. So expect, I would say, a lot better quality of education and getting a lot more out of it, but less time compressed. Expect more basketball training and training on the body and all that stuff. And definitely some elements of fun. I mean, look, these are still high school kids. We want to make sure that they build relationships with each other, that they can still do fun things, go to the mall, go on trips and things like that. That stuff is still important. We're not, it's a professional model, but it's not professional in the sense where they're not high school kids anymore.
Are they, I say this as the husband of a school board vice president, and I know there's just like so much hell about COVID protocols these days. You guys, in addition to everything else you're doing, you're managing a school, you're launching a school. Like, how are you handling that?
The COVID part specifically?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, because it's a smaller operation than a normal, I mean, it's still a big operation. It's probably 80 staff members. Obviously it's private and all that stuff. So we have a lot more, flexibility in terms of COVID policies and stuff. So, we're going to have really good vaccination rates and all those sorts of things through, sometimes enforcement, sometimes encouragement, all those things. We have a lot more resources to be doing testing really regularly. What's great is that if I'm hoping that the curve obviously goes way down for many reasons, including the fact that I'm supposed to get married in October. And it will definitely make our league a lot easier to operate if COVID goes away. But in a worst case where COVID gets worse and worse and we really have to shut down, we already have a bubble. Like what we are is a bubble. And of course, like we have, scheduled competition against international and against high schools and everything. But if the world had to shut down, we'd still have 24 elite athletes and a staff in a gym, and they wouldn't be losing a year or whatever months or whatever it can be. So really not hoping for that situation on many levels. But I do feel like we have an extra layer of protection for these athletes.
David had pros in Spain working out in parking garages, right? I mean, like it was for a while there, just having a gym was like, this was the key differentiator of, can you handle the pandemic as a pro basketball player? Okay.
Yeah. Is it public how you guys turn a profit for what you're doing? Like how do you guys benefit as a business?
Yeah, I look at it sort of in 3 main categories. The first is sponsorship. The global sports sponsorship space is an $80 billion space. Obviously, we're not going to capture all of that or even a majority of that. But I would say that, the big leagues, particularly in the United States, we know they're struggling to reach young people, and these sponsors want to reach young people, right? Like your business is not going to be around if you're just reaching 50-year-olds. I mean, you can still make a lot of money today, but a lot of businesses are currently targeting the folks in their 20s, which is really who we target, and you can't necessarily do that through traditional methods. So sponsorship is a big part of this, and we haven't announced.
In real terms, that means like you're going to have a social media video of players on your court in Atlanta or behind the scenes in Atlanta. It's going to be brought to you by like a shampoo company or something. This is what we're talking about.
Yeah. I mean, look, there's obviously different levels to it. There's different integrations. And one thing that I think is really important is that we are really focused on the off-court content as well, and actually the integration of those things. And so sometimes when we release footage from a game, like it'll cut from the game to like the kid waking up in the morning to an interview while they're getting their run in, whatever it is. And so because we're blending the on-court and the off-court, it gives us a lot of flexibility and creativity in terms of bringing in sponsors and, a jersey patch, on the floor, whatever, like we can do those things, but we can also kind of integrate into content a little bit more organically. So that's definitely a big sort of line item. The second big category is licensing and merchandise. So obviously you have things like jerseys, but you also have trading cards, NFTs. I mean, what's more valuable than the rookie trading card? I mean, if you get the trading card when they were 16, that's really, really valuable. So we see licensing and merchandise being particularly a big global opportunity, especially with the international players we have. I mean, LeBron Lopez is super famous in the Philippines. You could imagine people in the Philippines wanting to buy his OTE jersey. And again, players will see upside in that revenue stream. And then the last, and obviously the biggest one is media rights. Do I think that on day one, we're going to have a gigantic media rights deal? No. And in fact, I'm not sure I necessarily want one on day one, because I want to be able to leverage our 50 million overtime followers. And there's a world where we monetize ourselves through pay-per-view and things like that. But if you look at where the world is headed in terms of streaming, both sort of the traditional networks and then also the new wave companies, Amazon, Apple, et cetera, clearly sports is still the premium IP. And again, it goes back to my first point, which is there's not a lot of premium sports IP that attracts young people. And that's ultimately what we're building. So we think it's going to have a ton of value. But, we've raised, a lot of money to date from amazing investors. There's not a huge, we don't need to be profitable this year. Like we have money in the bank to be able to operate this.
Right. Do you think you're going to 24, 36, 48, or do you go up by increments of 8 because that's a team is 8 people? That's how you guys are doing it? Like how you see growth?
I see growth in sort of a lot of different axes, but certainly, there's definitely a world where we have more than 24 players as early as next year. In terms of the exact growth strategy, we have some thoughts on it, but I think that we have to be adaptive. We have to be adaptive to the marketplace, both on the athlete side and on the business side. But certainly, I think we can expect in the next few years to have more than 24 athletes. But this was sort of the right starting amount.
So you have a sort of sports business that doesn't have a stadium component, which is kind of a new thing, right? It's been like the NBA was the league of stadium owners, and they didn't really care if they had escapades or basketball. And they're like, fine, we'll get 40 dates of basketball, whatever, which is why I guess who was traded? Bill Russell was traded in part for some escapades dates. As I remember, right? So like, but you're just. The people buying a ticket is not part of it, which is, I think, a new thing.
Yeah. Well, I would say, first of all, we're sort of a single site league. It is important for our athletes to get some games sort of on the road. And so when we play some outside competition, we might do, a home and home sort of thing. So they will get on the road. But in terms of our venue, there will be sort of a live audience, of a couple thousand people. But we purposely designed the stadium not to fit tens of thousands of people, because we want a very intimate vibe, because the intimate vibe leads to really good digital content. And in fact, we ran a one-day event called the Overtime Takeover 2 years ago, which was a little bit of the spark for this idea in terms of how well the content performed. Did 150 million video views, a one-day event. It was insane. And we only had, I think, 400 people, but it felt so vibrant. And as our audience, it felt lit. And we want to create that type of environment. And we have, 8 different camera angles, et cetera. So it's built for digital consumption and for, the global fan base of hopefully billions of people someday.
So I know you know this well. And one of the issues in college is you have players transferring all the time. The transfer portal is the biggest recruiting thing going now. So a player wants to leave Kentucky, puts his name in the portal. Everyone can recruit him. They see him. They already know he played a year in college, 2 years, 3 years, whatever. Obviously, that's a different option for players that come play for you. Now they've gotten paid. A big reason why players transfer. The quote is, they're not letting me play my game. They're not letting me play the position I think I should play to make the NBA. You have to, Coach Ollie and his staff has to create systems that isn't plugging any player into a hole that the team has. If I'm 7 feet tall, but I want to be a small forward, and I think that's my future, you either have to convince him, no, that's not your future, or let him play to his future, even if he's not very good at it, and you lose games. So how are you guys managing that issue?
So I think it comes down, sort of at the core level to what is the goal for Coach Ollie and his staff. And of course, we want to win games. I mean, if we, if in our international and prep competition, we go 0-20, like that's not going to be a great look. I'm not really worried about that happening though. So the goal for Ollie and his staff, winning is maybe a secondary, tertiary goal. The number one goal and sort of our championship moment is the moment that athlete X walks across the stage and shakes Adam Silver's hand. And so if you think about that as the goal, it's really player development. It's sort of a different sort of use case, right? And so we as a team can say, okay, this might not be the best thing for winning this Saturday, but this is the type of in-game development that this athlete needs. And I think that it sort of goes back to the root of some of the issues that we see in grassroots basketball. It's that there's a lot of focus on the short term and winning this next game. And I know you just played 30 minutes in that AAU game, but if we win tonight, we're going to be in the championship game. And it's just not the focus of our program. We're going to have very competitive basketball. And obviously these athletes are going to win. They're going to be on a big stage in terms of all the fans that are watching digitally. But at the end of the day, the coaching staff is optimized around player development. And in fact, if you look at Coach Ollie's title, it's head coach and head of player development. Like we specifically wanted that in there to show how important it is. And by the way, he's the head coach and then he has a bunch of assistants, but that's for all 24 guys. When they break up into different teams, they'll have different assistant coaches coaching them, et cetera. But the whole structure is meant it's not really based around competition. It's based around player development from the athlete side. From an audience perspective, it's based around competition and we're going to have amazingly fun games. But for the players, it's about development.
Okay. I want to get your media brain on this thing that I had a conversation years ago at the MIT Sloan Sports Analytics Conference. They had a panel about like media rights and the future of sports and televised sports and what's going to happen. This is right in your wheelhouse here. Obviously, one of the panelists was at that time obscure Rockets business executive Rafael Stone, who now runs the whole basketball operation. But and he used to work for like the key lawyer in this area and knows a ton about rights and media rights and whatever. And it said a bunch of stuff. And then I like found him in the hallway. And that time I was looking at data, like internal data of just like how audiences behave, right? And so essentially what we're discussing is like the deals that are, the lucrative NBA broadcast deals that are happening now, which are really based on the key core product being like a cable broadcast of a game or occasionally a network broadcast of a game. Would be the most valuable thing that paid LeBron's salary and everybody else's, right? And it just, you couldn't see that was going to be the future, right? It just seemed like there's going to be a different product and we don't really know what it is. You probably know more than anyone exactly what's worth paying for a media company in sports, right? So in the hallway, I'm like, I don't totally buy that, like, the next person to own these rights is going to get any kind of ROI at the costs they're going to pay, right? And he's saying to me, like, first of all, there'll be one more. He's like, going to be one more round of just like, try it again the same way, right? Probably right. But then I was thinking, well, what if somebody does figure out not just a game broadcast, right? The reality show, the social thing, whatever it is, the intimate feeling arena with 8 cameras. It feels like, oh, seems like ding, ding, ding. Like, seems like we're kind of getting close to like the media product that young people actually would want to consume. So one, just can you weigh in on that? And then I have one more question for you on that thing.
Yeah, I think you're right about a lot of those hypotheses. I mean, I think you're so right that I don't even know if I'd consider them hypotheses. And certainly we want to be right at the heart of that. And I think that is one of the reasons why we wanted to own our own IP and our own league. We didn't want to really partner with anyone else. We could have gone to an existing high school or group of high schools and tried to partner, but we wanted to really have control over the whole system because I have some ideas, our team has some ideas, but it's going to require experimentation at a very quick pace, right? And I want to separate that from the athlete experience. Like, there's only so much experimentation that needs to happen on the basketball development side. Like, that's tried and true. We're not trying to mess with that system. We're just trying to give them more and better. But on the media side, we have to experiment. And so we're going to learn a lot in year one, in year two. And I think that because we don't have the legacy audience, and we don't have the legacy rights deals and legacy business model, we're going to be able to iterate very, very quickly. I do think that there is definitely a component of live that can still be very, very engaging for the young audience, but it has to grip them really in the beginning and really for every single minute. I mean, we know that the average watch time on Twitch, I think, is above an hour. It's not that young people can't sit down and watch something long and can't watch live. It just has to be programmed for them. And when I'm saying young, I'm not just talking about 10, 12-year-olds. I'm talking about people in their 20s like me. So I think that that's definitely a hard code to crack, but I believe that honestly, we're in the best position right now to solve that. And then I do think it's a really important point that you make, Henry, that I think VOD, video on demand, I think it's for some reason not really been tapped into in a full way in sports. I mean, I could see a world where our media rights is sort of these game episodes that are more VOD and they're cut downs, but they include off-court stuff. And we're releasing, we are going to release stuff like that every probably Saturday night or whatever it is. And then initially it'll live on our platforms, but why would, let's say, a Netflix or an Amazon Prime or whatever, like why would streaming platforms that maybe even haven't gone so deeply in live, that's really, really amazing content. So I think there's opportunity on live, there's opportunity on VOD. It's going to require a ton of iteration, but I am bullish on our team about getting there.
So I'm a little bit, thank you. That was fascinating. Let's pretend, so Anthony Simons went to IMG Academy, right? And let's pretend that instead he'd gone to Overtime Elite, and became a star of this, right? We see Anthony Simons, crying at breakfast because a loved one died, and then he goes and scores 100 points, whatever the thing is. Like, these things will happen at Overtime Elite, right? This is the design of the program, and it will be electric for him, right? He'll be interacting with an audience in a way that, frankly, would not happen his following year as a deep bench rookie on the Portland Trailblazers, right? Like, so it's kind of weird to go from like, could it not be the case that some Anthony Simons who becomes a hit and a media star in Georgia on your campus would put off going, get a little more famous, be a little bigger star, because the NBA is going to be a step down in his media presence and his just general how he's handled digitally?
Yeah, I would say it could certainly happen. And by the way, even pre-OTE, we've seen this happen where there have been athletes that we've covered when they're in high school and they get a ton of play and they dunk all the time, whatever. And for whatever reason, they're not seen by colleges as like a top prospect, and they go play D1 basketball, but they're the sixth guy on the bench or whatever. Sometimes even they're the star player at college, but they kind of shut down media opportunities. And we've seen athletes that have grown from 50,000 followers to 500,000 followers in 1 year just by us covering them. This is even pre-OTE. And then they go to college, and we've literally seen in some cases them lose followers, which sounds crazy. But if you're not around media of young people and people that can actually care about you, it can be problematic. I do think that our goal will be to get these athletes to break through a ceiling where they can kind of keep going, right? I mean, I think it would have been a really interesting case if LaMelo Ball was not quite as good at basketball as he is. I mean, he's obviously also really freaking good at basketball, but imagine if he had been, drafted late second round, is the fact that he came in with 5 million followers, Zion Williamson, some of the stars that we've covered that have really, really broken through, if they were middling NBA players, would they still be really famous and growing? I think they would have had a better shot. And so that could happen to some of our athletes too. They become really famous, but basketball wise, they don't have quite the ceiling that everyone thought. They make the NBA, but they can still make a lot of money off of endorsement deals, et cetera.
We have some questions. Oh, go ahead, David. Then we'll get some questions from the chat.
What league's rules are you playing by?
Oh,
it's a really good question. And we've had a lot of conversations about that. Ultimately, it will actually be a variety, right? If we're going to play a high school team, that will look a little bit different from us playing internally. And we want our athletes to get a variety. We want them to play in some games that are actual NBA rules, so that they can kind of get a sense of the cadence and all that stuff. But their bodies might also not be ready for that, to play every single game like that. So, the short answer is it'll be a combination. And ultimately, we do care about the fans too, right? We're not going to be doing anything crazy, gimmicky. There's not going to be a 4-point shot line or things like that.
I'm sorry to hear that. That's too bad.
We are going to do special events like dunk contests and stuff like that. Maybe you'll see a 4-point shot pop up once or twice a year, but not in like the serious games. But yeah, again, experimentation there, both on behalf of the audience and on the athletes.
Well, of course, it comes down to what 3-point lines are on the court.
That I'm pretty sure it's NBA 3-point line.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure.
I just saw a picture of a college court. What's that?
That's pretty far for a sophomore.
It's far for a sophomore.
Well, it'll be technically it'll be juniors and above, but yeah. But honestly, I remember, we worked with Trae Young when he was in high school. I mean, he was a senior, but 1 year older than probably the youngest player. And I mean, he was launching from everywhere. And obviously, Trae Young is an amazing deep range shooter. So maybe not the best use case, but you guys know it's the Steph Curry generation. These athletes are shooting pretty darn deep anyway.
Yeah.
All right. So quick question. So Greg was wondering, are you recruiting against or even from the NBA academies in Australia, China, etc.?
I don't think we've recruited any players from those academies. I mean, I don't know if we have any like specific rules around that. But we have not to date, I don't believe.
There was some conversation about band lunch being nerd time, and your colleague Kayla seemed very supportive of that idea. How did you come up? Devin's wondering, how did you come up with the name Overtime?
It's so funny because the name Overtime, it seems inevitable now, right? Like, I mean, or at least in my head, like I say overtime every single day. Like it seems like it couldn't be any other way. When we started the company though, we had like 12 candidate names. And my co-founder and I, we said, these are like the 12 finalists. And I think we had 5 people working for us. And everyone, I think, got like 3 pennies, and you got to like place it on a paper plate that said each one. And I think we were kind of always going to choose Overtime, but it really felt like we were like, all right, I guess we're. And in the beginning we were like, is that too normal of a word? Like, can we be SEO optimize all these things? And then luckily we become big enough where it's like, yeah, that's Overtime. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's a good one. What is a typical day like for you as president of Overtime?
A lot of meetings. I feel like I'm always on the phone. I mean, I would say that my sort of MO is that, founder and president of a company, there's a few things that you should be focused on. One is sort of what I call like the multiplier effect, right? We have almost 200 people working for us, right? If I can increase each of their capacity by 10% by unlocking something for them, that's the work of 20 people. As much as I work, I can't do 20 people's work. So a lot of it is around that. A lot of it is obviously around external relations and things like that. Like, I don't necessarily want just anyone representing on a podcast like this. Obviously, fundraising is always a big part of startups. We're sort of always fundraising, and luckily the inbound has been insane in the past couple of years. And I think the last component is like trying to be as visionary as I can be, and trying to figure out where we can not fall into sort of history and try something new. And obviously, Overtime Elite is an example of that.
While Gerard Hector joins us, he always has better questions than us at the end of the show. A note from Caleb, a trivial thing that probably will be important. You better design some dope jerseys people want to buy /wear/look at. Yes.
Short answer, yes. Longer answer, I don't think that we've revealed them quite yet. I'm not sure. I've seen them, and I do think they're dope. And look, I think that's an area for innovation as well. And obviously they're going to be sweat resistant, all like the performance stuff, but I think it's an area for innovation in terms of, can fans vote on their favorite jerseys? Can they have an impact on that? We're very focused on community and fans. And I think that there's interesting things we can do there, but certainly to be able to buy 16-year-old's jersey, an official jersey, is a pretty cool concept that I think will resonate with people.
Gerard.
Hi guys, Zach, this has been really interesting, and I have a billion questions, but as the sort of resident socialist on this podcast, the first question I have for you is your company's obviously, it looks like it's the future of media in many ways, right? Like what you're doing and sort of blazing a trail. And this is obviously something you hope becomes massively large and super successful. But I can't help but notice, like, okay, you're covering sports, which tend to be predominantly dominated by minorities. Like, how are you as a company building to make sure that you have representation inside your offices, not just the athletes you recruit, but whomever, like in your C-suite, in your, technical roles, whatever that may be?
Yeah, I mean, look, obviously DEI is an important thing for every company. But I think to your point, Gerard, like it's particularly important for our program, given how many, the diversity of the young men in our program. And so we've made a very conscious effort across the board at Overtime, but particularly in Overtime Elite, that these athletes, have role models that they can look up to that oftentimes look like them and have similar backgrounds. And so, our commissioner, Aaron Ryan, spent 22 years at the NBA. He's African-American. Brandon Williams, as I mentioned, assistant GM, African-American. Our principal, our head of HR, and obviously there's a lot of different forms of diversity, but, it's no secret. I think, a large majority of the athletes that we signed are African-American. So I think that it's not lost on us. It's an important thing. We have, many African-American investors as well. And I also think that's where the equity component comes in. We want to make sure that if OTE is a huge financial success, these athletes also see upside in that.
Zack, is there on the calendar a plan to start doing the same thing on the women's side?
I'm interested in it longer term. We kind of have to start somewhere. And I think starting with both would be even for us, a lot to take on. Obviously there's different dynamics in the women's game. I mean, you generally see, players play 4 years in college, which is just a different dynamic than in men's, and there's other things going on. But certainly, we actually have the biggest women's basketball platform on Instagram and TikTok, Overtime WBB. So it's a big focus for us. But in the next couple of months, we're not going to be announced.
You got your hands full right now.
The other thing, Zack, is, thinking about the future of media, as Henry is talking about. When I think about Overtime and what you do, it's like a weird episode of Black Mirror runs through my head, right? Where it's like, okay, like what's actually going to work for people? And you mentioned a lot of times with the games, it'll cut to right after the game, the players like in the locker room or whatever, in their morning, waking up, going to breakfast. Like, do you see that ultimately as a thing where, like, I mean, maybe not like a computer chip in somebody's brain where you can just go in and see what their day is like, but is that sort of where you see the future of media going, where it's a lot more of that? I don't want to say reality because it's got such negative connotations to it, but you know what I mean? That sort of like,
I think if I had to boil down that sort of thesis, I think I would use the word context, right? Like, I think if you turn on, let's say ESPN at a random time, and let's say there's a random high school football game on, right? Like the amount of people that have any level of context watching that is so freaking small, right? And the context that's normally layered on is like, oh, this kid is thinking about going to this college. Okay, well, you picked up, maybe 50,000 people in the country that really are deep into recruiting for that school. Like the context is just so small. And so for us, like, over time, we're about widening the aperture for who's interested, right? And I think that high school basketball, as it was, before Overtime started, I think was, if you're a really big hoops fan like you guys, or your local star was really good, like it didn't have no audience, but it wasn't national storylines. And I feel like context is huge for storylines. I mean, I think about, again, this one day event we ran, the Overtime Takeover. We decided we didn't really do a dunk contest. We did a dunk show so that you wouldn't have like a million dunks in a row missing. And we didn't care that much about the scores, whatever. And we had this whole storyline where the video starts out with a couple incredible dunks and then it rewinds. And then it shows you like the history of this kid. He's sort of the underdog at the event, but he's like, I'm coming. Like, I think that I can be the dunker. And we like recasted a scene of like, he remembers this time he tried to dunk and he fell on his back and there were these girls laughing. So we like recasted that scene, and like, it makes you care. It's like gripping. I recommend going on YouTube, searching Overtime Takeover dunk show. But like, it's just very different than just flipping on a random dunk contest and being like, I don't know anything about these athletes. Like, I got to sit through 3 hours for the missed dunks. So it's a lot of reformatting around context, I think.
We have like 1 minute left. Judy, our COO, is very serious about ending the show on time. So we're not gonna mess with that. But to your point, I think about the Queen's Gambit. Like, nobody watches chess, or right. I don't know, but like, it's just like you're about to cry with how much you care about a chess match because the context and the story makes you care about her so much, right? There's a little space between that and The game.
No, I think that's spot on. And as someone who played way too much chess in my life, it's funny you use that, but that's been the biggest boon to chess, honestly, in my lifetime. And probably before my lifetime was Fischer Spassky, because you had the Soviets and there was context, right? Yeah. And so I think that thing is huge. And you saw, there's all these stats about how chessboards became sold out, and chess.com, usership, all the stuff spiked after that. And actually, it's not just a spike. A lot of it has been sustained. And I still hear people talking about it. But I think it's a great analogy.
Yeah. Okay. Zack, this is exciting. I guess we should check in with you in 6 months or so and see how it's going, right? It's going to be
to do that. Yeah. And we'd love to have you guys
crazy. You're going to have an exciting period, and you're getting married. So low stress. Yeah. Perfect.
We'll recap it all next time for sure.
Right. Thank you very much for joining us, Gerard, David, Judy. We'll see you guys. Thank you.